Hey, I want to welcome everybody, and today's video is how we take all of this and turn it into this. We've been asked to create a stereo playback rig, and so we're gonna take a lot of the things that you've been learning in our Knowledge Basic videos, and now we're gonna put it into a system. And we decided to build the system in the studio along with you. My name is Bruce Gilson, and I am excited to be able to share this with you. This has a whole lot of requirements and moving pieces, and we're gonna be able to put it all inside of a road case, and it's gonna be able to tour North America and Europe. And so make sure you pay attention to some of these details as we begin to put it together. All right, so we're not gonna do this whole video in real time, but there's a couple things I just wanna touch about as we're getting started. We also had a lighting change. We had to turn on some work lights so that I can see what I'm doing here. I'm gonna pull out their tools just because I think that it's kind of cool that they provide them, and let you know if I think that they're good. First one that I picked works perfectly there. You're gonna see I've got a lot of Blackmagic on the table. We are Blackmagic dealers. I've been using Blackmagic literally kind of since the beginning when they really started entering into the market. And I've got a lot of good experience with Blackmagic. I also have some bad experience with Blackmagic. And so kind of let me talk about some of the bad experience. Number one, Blackmagic uses all of their metal components, the metal parts of their body, all of it is used as a heat sink. And there's part of that that's cool, like this microconverter, this thing, the whole chassis is metal, and so they can make it so small because they're using the whole thing as a heat sink. The problem is if you use adhesive, a lot of times when people are putting these things inside of racks on shelves, they'll put adhesive on the bottom of those things, or they'll wrap them in Velcro. You're actually trapping in a ton of heat, and they can overheat quite a bit. This unit is also gonna have a decimator in it. If you're familiar with decimators, they're great products, but they're much larger, and they have a lot of plastic, wrapped around them. The plastic has heat dissipation properties in it. It's a little bit larger form factor, but they don't overheat as much as Blackmagic tends to overheat. So that's kind of some advantages. The other thing I'll say about Blackmagic, specifically when it comes to event technology, it is so affordable that if you're nervous about it, tapping out on you for whatever reason, you can have one on hand extra, and then if the primary one ever gives you a problem, you just have a quick plan to swap them out, and typically stuff like that is just fine. So anyways, I pulled the top off of that rack there. We've got a universal shelf for our Constellation, and so I'm gonna pull the shelf off. You can mount these things on non-Blackmagic shelves, but I want to talk a little bit about when you're building a tour rack versus when you're building something that is going to be, sitting for forever. So as an example, in our studio, we have a rack over there, and we have a Constellation mounted in our rack in the studio. And in that scenario, we did not use a Blackmagic rack. We just used, or shelf, sorry. We just used a standard shelf, and it's fine. There's no problem with it. But when you're building a touring rack, you have to think through the fact that this stuff is going to be thrown and jostled and, just either on a truck or under an airplane. It's going to end up having a whole lot of vibration that gets added to it. And for that reason, you kind of do things a little bit differently, almost like you're building it so that it can be prepared for an earthquake, because you're not going to get this kind of really good environment that it gets to live in. So for that reason, I highly recommend using an actual Blackmagic shelf for their products, because it has mounting holes with screws that go straight into the bottom of the product, and then that way, whatever vibration you're experiencing while it's on the road, it's not really a problem. So, you know, I've been on tour before, and it's never fun when you go to set up your equipment and you realize you're gonna have to break open your case because stuff has come undone, it's falling apart because it was, you know, abused or whatever. At some level, you can't 100% avoid that, but that's one of the big things that you're thinking about as you're building touring stuff versus when you're just, you know, putting stuff inside of a rack. I'll also say that later on in the process, we're going to be using a lot of zip ties, and Velcro has really become the standard in our industry. And so when you see me putting on zip ties, I don't want you to be like, whoa, why is that guy putting on zip ties? I'm putting on zip ties because, for the exact same reason I just talked about, I don't really want to, you know, I don't really want to use Velcro because Velcro is not, you know, strong enough to handle all the vibration, and Velcro can easily come off. So I put the Constellation on the rack. You can kind of see here, there's places where it has mounting holes. Screws are right here. So I can just take these screws out and I can mount my Constellation. I want to think through real quick though. If I was an operator, would I prefer this to be on the left or the right? I think I would prefer it to be on this side. So, all right. Sometimes when you're working like this, you can't forget that you're like building stuff in opposite reverse direction, and you want to be careful. Now this tool right here was provided to us by our Circle 3 guys, but I think it's the perfect tool also for these screws. So instead of using my own tweaker, I can use the tweaker that came with it. Nope, it's a little bit too small for those screws, so to switch over to my own tools here. The Blackmagic screws are actually standard size for the screwdriver, even though the screws themselves are really tiny. All right, perfect. And then I have a lot of different converters, and whenever I'm trying to, you know, figure out how I want to design a rack, I'll kind of take all of my converters and I'll start laying them out and get a feel for basically where all the cables are going to flow before I actually start mounting them. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So as I was saying, I work on trying to get stuff laid out, thinking about cable paths. Down here on the power adapter, I've left me some space on both sides so I can bring things in nice and clean. We decided to go with an Anchor power connector, or power adapter. This is going to be rated for European power as well. Everything inside of it can run off of 240. And so this device also can be run off of 240. It comes with a standard power cord. We're actually going to be cutting this and adapting it into a PowerCon adapter so that it's hot swappable. And when they're in Europe, they can swap that out for European plugs. All the Blackmagic stuff works that way. The Apple products that we're putting in work that way. So it's going to be a really versatile rig from that standpoint. And then when I'm looking at my adapters, you want to be thinking through signal flow, like how are like things going to be headed in like directions. And what I mean by that is I've made the decision to go ahead and put all of my SDI facing one direction, and then all of my HDMI is going to be following the other direction. And so on these adapters, I've got HDMI and power on one side, and I've got my SDI on the other side. So I'm just kind of trying to think through, okay, this is going to flow. All of my SDI can go one direction. My HDMI can come up and, you know, plug into the face here. And then I can use this slotted shelf to really mount everything nice and tight using zip ties, so that when my HDMI connectors go in, they get zip tied down and then they don't jostle. And then This is the part that I'm the most excited about using the Circle 3 Designs rack. This is gonna go at the very top. And if I had a lid here, it'd be super difficult for me to get in here and to service this. But the fact that this comes off, it's gonna be really easy. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'm gonna start mounting these devices now that I've got a good idea of how I wanna lay them out. You're gonna see here in this video, I'm gonna mount real small pieces of Velcro underneath these converters. I just talked about how they use the entire converter as heat sink, and you shouldn't put Velcro on it. I'm gonna do a really small piece, keeping it all in mind of what we know to be true about these devices. But the small piece helps hold it in place so that then I can zip tie it actually into staying still. So, you know, just a little bitty piece isn't gonna hurt. It's really the danger of when you try to cover the entire thing with, you know, Velcro, and then now you've covered up this entire area that's designed for heat shrink. So. Another little professional touch when you're adding Velcro to stuff is always consider which side of your Velcro is getting which piece. If it's like it's dual textured. So this one has like the teeth on one side and has that fuzzy part on the other side. And I know it's a small thing, but I get kind of annoyed when I'm getting inside of a rack and I gotta pull a couple of adapters off, and they're all the same adapters, but then the Velcros don't line up and they don't match each other, which means I have to work on getting the exact same adapter back in the exact same spot. So I just always kind of try to pay attention to what side of the Velcro I'm attaching to my stuff so that it's kind of interchangeable. All right, I just want to talk again. So why am I zip tying this down? It is certainly not attractive. It's not for the good looks. But what it is for is this thing's a touring rig. It's going to be jostled and bumped and thrown, and I want to make sure that the stuff inside of it's not going to go anywhere. So if all I would have done is the zip ties and I hadn't put that little piece of Velcro, they would have a tendency to slide left and right. But by putting that little bit of Velcro, they're not sliding left and right, they're not gonna slide back and forth, and then it really becomes a solid system, and it's gonna, you know, hold the test of time. So that's why we've gone through those extra lengths that we've gone through. Okay, so I've got everything like really grossly just plugged in. And the reason I'm doing it like this right now is I want to test all my devices, make sure that my devices with my power cords work properly before I go to the place where I, you know, strap it all down and I make sure everything is looking nice and pretty, and then I end up having some sort of power problem. So my micro converters, power light, so those look like they're doing fine. Got power light here, and my Constellation has also powered up. That's great. So now I know that, okay, when I go and I actually clean all these cables up, I've got power to everything. I also want to say, when you're building a touring rig, power jostling loose is like the #1 problem that happens with touring rigs. Typically, you don't have a device go bad. BNCs don't come out. If you're doing your HDMIs right, they're not coming out, but power coming out is super common. So you always want to make sure you're kind of going the extra mile when you're dealing with power inside of a touring rack, trying to do everything you can to just make sure that it does not jostle loose, because it's pretty annoying that, you know, everything's clean and tidy and it's perfect, and then you get to a venue and you got to pull out your tools and start cracking open your case because you've got a microconverter or something that doesn't power up. So we're gonna kind of just start going through the extra layers here to make sure that everything stays plugged in properly. I'm doing a technique right here where I'm, organizing the flow of my power cables. And the way that I do this, first off, let me say, I really feel like the details matter. I am getting paid. This isn't my rack. This isn't for my local band or anything. This is for a customer that pays me to build this rack for him. And so I really feel like it's worth taking these extra steps to make sure everything looks great, that we know that professionals were involved with building this, and that the customer doesn't look at it and go, oh, well, I could have done a better job. You don't want that, right? So that's one piece of it, is why take this level of detail. Makes it easier to service is another big reason to do the detail. But anyways, let me tell you this little trick I'm doing here. I'm leaving these little zip tie tails, and when I leave the tail, it means to me I might want to change it. And so I need it there so that I have the ability to manipulate the wire and make it look like I want it to look. But I'm not cutting it yet because I'm thinking to myself, I might not love the look of that long term. And so this is kind of my own little personal trick to remind me to come back and look at it, or that it might not be exactly what I want. But right now I'm pretty happy with the way this is coming together. So here's another technique I'm about to do here, and you can really apply this into any rack work, even if you're using Velcro. But I already have a zip tie in the same spot. I'm going to add another zip tie, but the new zip tie is going to hold a new cable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the exact same spot. I'm going to add the new cable to it. Then I'm going to cinch it down, make it look the way that I want it to look. And I am going to remove the old zip tie because I now have a new zip tie doing the work. And that right there really, helps these racks stay clean. I could do the same thing with this zip tie right here, but that definitely helps these things stay a lot more clean, and makes it to where people are like, oh wow, how did you get all that to look like that? Well, you took the time to make it look right. So let's see if I can squeeze this one in here. A little bit harder to get to. Let me go from the other direction. Oh, that's going to be perfect. See that right there? In case my fingers are in the way, I'm going to kind of show you. This is my new zip tie with the cables going the way that I want the cables. That's my old zip tie. And then I'm just going to cut that zip tie off, pull it out, so that now that lays exactly the way I want it to lay. All right, cool. So I feel confident that once I'm actually ready to mount this part, that my power is going to stay put. It's going to be nice and clean. And my HDMIs, they're going to go to a custom plate that we're going to put in the back later. But right now, I think that all of this is pretty bulletproof for the long term. So pretty excited. So I've started to get nervous at how this power adapter is going to do long term. So As I've said, you're just taking every precaution to make sure that stuff's not going to jostle loose. By using this small zip tie against this large zip tie, the large zip tie keeps us anchored to the base, and then the small zip tie keeps this anchored to that, which hopefully prevents it from moving and keeps all this nice and secure so that we don't have problems down the road. Yeah, I'll keep you posted. I'll update you if I feel like it's got more problems that we need to be aware of. I'm going to mount this extra power here. I'm going to mount it over on this sidewall, but I'm going to do what I just talked about. I'm going to leave that zip tie long so that I know that it's just kind of there right now. It's not really finished. You know what I'm saying? It's just enough to where I can go worry about other things. So far, so good. All right. I'm going to clean this one up in a little bit as I kind of get my head wrapped around how the SDI is going to flow. This power cable is kind of coming from a different direction than the other stuff. So that's why you can get it cleaned up in the initial setup. But that gets us definitely headed in the right direction. All right. If you haven't watched our video series on SDI, I would recommend go watch that. There's a lot of videos in that series because SDI can be a lot trickier than one might think. And so what we're working with right here is this mini SDI. And I've got my Belden double bubble connectors, and we're going to start the SDI portion of this build. You know, this wire is not super rigid, and so it's one challenge with dealing with these and putting the connector heads on is you end up having to really press hard into these things to make it all go in. So, got to exercise your finger grip for sure. But if you're unfamiliar with the tools that I've got, make sure you go watch the double bubble video. So let me talk a little bit about what I'm doing and what my thought process is right now. I have my SDI just like a little tester cable. I've got it connected to basically the furthest side of the ATEM. If you can see that from the above camera, it's on the furthest side. And then I'm going this way to this wall, and then it's going to come up and it's going to go over here, and I'm kind of figuring it out to the furthest SDI port away from the sidewall. So this eventually becomes the longest that my cables need to be. So then I can make a bunch of jumpers that all match this, organize them in such a way that they all begin to flow where I want them to flow. But if you'll notice, I added a little loop down here. Now, whether you're doing a permanent install rack or you're doing a portable rack, you always want to make sure that you're thinking through service loops. And there's a different reason whether you're doing a permanent install or a temporary, portable rack like this. But essentially, we're going to put a custom plate. Let me cut this real quick so I can stop holding it. We're going to put a custom plate on the back of this rack, okay? And what I want to do is I want to build a service loop into all my cables so that when I open, if somebody was to come after me and they were to pull this custom plate off, when they do that, all the cable comes with it. And the main reason that you want it to come with it is when they go to service it, if they open that up, you don't want it to just absolutely tug and pull. You don't want everything to be so short and tight that they end up damaging something when they're actually trying to get inside and fix it. Now, the advantage between this rack and other racks is that it is top accessible. But once I mount this particular tray, once I mount it right here, I could pop the top and I could access this, but I still can't access that. I'm probably going to have to go ahead and take off that custom plate. And when I take off that custom plate, I want to have a little bit of room on the cables so that I don't damage it while I'm trying to service it. So that's the main thing that I'm trying to think through, is the future of how they're going to work with this thing long term. If you have watched our videos on termination, hopefully you know that I believe that labeling things is extremely important. And so as I'm going into the next phase where I'm building out my SDI, I'm going to go ahead and start labeling my SDI. Your HDMI cables, pre-made cables, you can label those as well. They are a little bit more difficult to label because they don't want to, the labels don't want to stick, and it's hard to leave heat shrink over the labels. So I'm going to go ahead and prep this label here. Got my heat gun, and I'll start building labels and labeling labels so that as I put it together, it's good to go. So we did opt to go with miniature SDI cable, and we decided to do that primarily because this rack is so small that we wanted to make sure that we have plenty of room for our cable. Whenever you're speccing out cable, you want to pay attention to how far of a distance are you trying to travel with that cable. That's really one of the main factors that determines what cable type you should be using. Don't really want to get into a ton of that information, but just kind of pay attention to SDI. It's not just any kind of cable that will do what you want it to do. It's got to be pretty, specific to the case use that you've got. We are doing 12G cable. That's primarily because that's what we have. And so even though this is not a 12G rig, this is 12G cable. And the reason it's not a 12G rig because the constellation is actually a 3G switcher. And so the maximum resolution of this rig is going to be 1080p 60. That'll be the maximum resolution for this rig. We have not done a video on how to build racks yet. It's one of the ones that we want to get to. Haven't gotten to that place at the moment. So I want to talk through a couple little things that I'm doing right now. I'm nowhere near done with the amount of SDI. Let me take a look here. If I do that, you can see a little better. I'm nowhere near done with the amount of SDI that I'm going to have. But I want to start thinking in groups, and I want to think in direction. And so these cables that I have right here are all going to roughly go the same direction. And so what I want to do is I want to start treating this group like it's, one group. So if I make a service loop like that, what I'm going to do, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you're just using zip ties to not be permanent, but to just help you with your organization. So I'm going to zip tie that together just so I can keep it organized. And then I'm going to go ahead and temporarily mount this rack or this shelf here. The shelf, I'm not ready for it to stay permanently mounted, but I need it to kind of live in its home for a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this guy. And I'm going to leave these cables in such a way that I can still, access, basically service this while I'm building it. But as I'm thinking through where my cables are going, I'm going to start getting my path right on my cables, and then I can start cutting them to length. So if all my cables follow this real nice, pretty path, and then when I get them where I want them, then I start cutting them to length, you're gonna see the benefit to why I cut one, at the furthest place apart, and then now I've got all these other ones. I'm gonna end up, everything's gonna be a little bit longer, but I can start building a nice channel where everything flows in the right direction. So that's kind of where I'm headed. That's where my brain's at right now, the things I'm beginning to put together. Just want to give you a quick heads up as we really begin to think about this. I push pause for a second to do some temporary labeling on the opposite end of my cables. So once I bundled them together, I would know what they are. You could do that with permanent, but I'm not ready to put my permanent labels on. So put a little bit of blue tape for temporary cables. And then now I'm going to start this kind of organization process of what I want my cables to look like long term. So I've identified which 4 cables need to go to the top rack for my SDI connectors at the top. I've got those cables here in my hand. And then I'm just trying to think through, how do I want this service loop, how do I want it to look? How do I want it to live long term? Okay, so I made a mistake. And this is the second reason that you're gonna build in service loops. I wish I would have done this on purpose so it could have been just a good learning moment, but I didn't do it on purpose. I actually just made a mistake. And what I did was I mislabeled a cable, and then I built in the whole thing and I prepped it to go to where I thought it was supposed to go. And then I realized it's the wrong cable because the cable that I was going to land has the correct number on it. So this is how it works. I take out my service loop, and because I built my service loops properly, this cable can now reach anywhere in the rack that it needs to reach. So yeah, it's a mistake, but I don't have to rebuild the whole cable. I actually can just repurpose it, put it back in, and it's going to be fine. So that's the other reason why you build service loops, is so that whether it's you or somebody who comes in the future, if they're going to make some changes, there's plenty of cable for them to make those changes. I essentially have the whole top rack built out. Everything's wired up. I do have some audio that needs to go into our de-embedder here. I can get that, all the video and powers done up there. We got a custom plate that goes onto the back here. So one of the next things that I need to do is I need to get the custom plate and start prepping video wires to go from the ATEM constellation over into the custom plate. And it's gonna be a bunch of pre-builts and stuff like that. So I'm gonna take this opportunity to clean my desk a little bit, clean up the things that I'm done with, and then we'll start jumping into the SDI custom plate. All right, so it's a new day here on this stereo playback rig. We got a wardrobe change. We've kind of cleaned up our desk a little bit. We've added a blank plate on the front of our rack. And now we're gonna really be focusing on building out the SDI on the back side of the rack and we're going to be adding the custom plate as it comes in. And then we've got some soldering for the audio that we need to do. We need to go ahead and get our power ready from our anchor, and then we're almost done. Let's jump in. Okay, cool. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna set up our custom plate that's gonna go on the back of the rack. Now, the Circle 3 Designs has all kinds of punch outs for the chassis mounts that we're gonna be adding to our custom plate. We didn't know that when we made the decision to go custom plate, and we've discovered that later. But also there's an advantage to having a custom plate because we have printed labeling on this custom plate. The custom plate that we went with for this build is made by Elite Core, and Elite Core sends us all the chassis that we need in order to build our custom plate, and then we got to sit here and put it together. So I'm going to be doing that. I also want to talk a little bit about kind of some philosophy behind the way that we build the custom plates. The specific use for this rig only needs 2 computers. It needs stereo audio, needs some output, multi-viewer, and program. And that sounds, okay, that's simple enough. But I personally don't like reducing a lot of the functionality of your equipment for a single purpose use. I really would prefer, especially because this is going to be a touring rig that's going to last for a long time, to give them access to most of everything that's inside of here, and then they can move and choose how they want to use it down the road. Even though it's specifically going to support a specific show right now, the needs might change down the road, and they would still want to be able to use the same rig. So we've given them a lot more access to ins and outs of the constellation than what the client requested, but I think it's still going to be simple enough that we're not creating a lot of confusion as to how the custom plate works. So we're going to start building our custom plate. Okay, so there you have it. You've got the custom plate built out with all the chassis mounts and everything that we ordered. Now, if you're watching that process, you might have asked yourself, how does he know what goes where? I helped design the plate, so I just kind of have it memorized. But if you were not a part of the design process, make sure you're referencing the drawings. Because this got ordered off of drawings, and so if you're helping build this and you didn't design it, just reference the drawings. And that's really the same process, what I just did there, if I was going to be building it into Circle 3's top plate, right? So as you can see, all I've essentially done, instead of doing it in their top plate, I've done it into a custom plate. And that is one of the values of going with the Circle 3 Design rack. Now, do I wish that we would have done it that way? Maybe. I have really nice printed, labeling on here. If you went with their rack, you're not going to get that customized printing. You're going to have to, use a labeler or tape or whatever to print it off yourself. I think it could go either way. If you're selling this, like if you're a professional and you're putting this together for somebody else, it's kind of worth going the extra mile, to get it printed off and make it look real nice. But I definitely don't see anything wrong with if I was building this for my band, if I was building this for myself, and I, wanted to just put some tape on here and label it depending on what use I'm going to use it for, definitely wouldn't hurt anything. So now that we got our custom plate built up, we can go back to the rack and start putting everything together. All right, so as you can see, I've got all my video patched, connected. I'm kind of messing with the custom panel, seeing how it's going to fit. I'm really happy with the way that most of this is coming together. I will say that I've got The backside connections of my custom plate are running into the back connections of my ATEM, which means I'm probably going to need to offset those. And this is one of the challenges with dealing with such small flight racks. You just really don't have a lot of room for everything that's going on. So I'm going to have to mess with that a little bit. Hopefully I can come up with a solution that I'm happy with and that looks good. But, you know, we're getting real close to being done here. See if I can flip this up. There you go. So you can kind of see there. I can get it to line up like that. So I might have to sacrifice a little bit of aesthetic. We'll see. All right. So the next thing we got to do is we need to begin to hook up audio. We've got some USB connections. We've got some power connections. We're getting super close, but I'm going to take this opportunity to clean up and get on to the next part. One of the things that we need to add into this rack that I haven't talked about is we're actually going to add a small little wireless access point. And what that's going to do is give the customer wireless control over the ATEM constellation inside. So we've got a little wireless access point here. This is made by TP-Link, real small, but I will say that they've got amazing distance. I've got turned on to these by a buddy of mine, Mike, if you're out there, thank you so much. He turned me on to these and they work great. They're line of sight, but I've been in pretty large performance halls and they've reached from front of house all the way to stage so that then I can, you know, give wireless control over the ATEM and you can put it on the iPad, go hand it to somebody on stage, and then they can, you know, make adjustments as needed. So we're going to hide this guy inside of our rack. I have opened it back up. What we're going to do is we are going to mount this onto the top of our ATEM, and then we're just going to really simply hook straight up to it. When we close it all up, you wouldn't know it was there unless you have access to the wireless network that we've set up. Okay, cool. So simple enough. WAP is now set up inside of the rack. Now I'm going to transition into building my power whips. Probably think the song is about you, don't you? I need music to do this because I'm going to go crazy. Hey, why are you recording? You're not supposed to record my singing. Jonathan, I'm on to you. So I already have a power whip made up for the exterior of the rack. So the rack's going to ship with this guy and they're just going to click in. Now they have got power to the rack. But there's a couple of things that we're going to do on here. Number one, I mentioned earlier, we have this anchor product on the inside, and that is going to be our power adapter that will also help us be able to convert to European power. Doesn't do the conversion, but it can handle 120 or 240. So then this rig can travel all across the world. But in order to make all that work, I have to take their plug and I've got to cut it and convert it to be able to fit into the back of our plates here. If you have seen our captive screw video, you have some ideas on how to build the whips. We also have some power adapters here that this is built on captive screw. So you can see all that inside that video. And then I'll give you an idea of what I'm doing inside of here. So I can't make it feel like I am giving you advice on how to do this because we're dealing with high voltage. that's why everything is blurred out. I will say that we have a guy on our team that is a high voltage expert, and this is approved. I can't tell you exactly what it is. So be careful when you're dealing with high voltage. It really isn't a joke. Not only can bad things happen to your technology, but really bad things can happen to the people that you're trying to take care of. So just be careful. Okay, so we have our electrical made up here, and we're going to go ahead and plug in our electrical cord like so. And then I'm going to give this power. We're just going to test everything. Make sure that it all comes on the way that it's supposed to. I can hear the ATEM powering up. So it's got power, it looks nice and clean, and then all of my adapters have power. Those look good. This adapter's got power. And I've given myself some auxiliary power here, and so I'm gonna build that coming up next. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to hook up our audio. We are de-embedding audio from this Blackmagic device. So program sends to the de-embedder. The reason that we are de-embedding audio is so that we can have an XLR left and right output on the outside of our rig, and that can go off to front of house audio within the venue of wherever this thing is going to live. And then the reason that we don't have any other place to embed audio is because it is going to be embedded on the HDMI cables coming off of the computer. Now, we've done other rigs before where we've added PCDI boxes, we've added embedders so that they can get audio in a different way. This is really just designed to be as simple as possible to get the tour in and out of, airports in Europe or whatever. So we're doing everything internally, and they're going to embed the audio on the HDMI cable. The Constellation is going to take that audio, it's going to send the audio down program. The de-embedder is going to strip the audio off, and we're going to take it off and we're going to put it through the XLR jacks on the back. Now we have 1/4 inch from our de-embedder, and then we have to convert that into XLR at the plate. If you haven't watched our videos on soldering, I highly recommend you go watch those videos. And in those videos, you're going to find that I often talk about that you need to go to YouTube, pull up a wiring diagram, and follow the wiring diagram. So in this particular example, which is not really about doing audio, but today we have a cable. This is a 1/4 inch cable, and it has a tip and it has a sleeve. This is a tip sleeve 1/4 inch, which is a mono cable, which is fine because we're doing a mono left, mono right into our XLRs. There's also something called a tip ring sleeve, TRS cable, and a TRS has the tip and it has actually 2 rings on the sleeve portion, and that each of those are different conductors. So when you're looking for the wiring diagram, make sure you're picking the correct 1/4 inch adapter. We're going to be doing the tip sleeve adapter today. So I'm putting on the custom plate. I hope for the last time. It's missing one cable, but I can access that cable from the bottom, and I'll be able to plug that in, so I'm not worried about that. But I wanted to take this moment right now as I'm putting this custom plate on to mention how nice this Circle 3 design is, with the fact that it is top accessible. This is not my first rig to build that is similar to this or this size. And I tell you, it is just a pain to try to get your hands in here and do all that. And as you can tell, I'm doing some dress work while everything is put together because Circle 3 has provided this top that I can just put on once I'm done. There it is. I'm gonna screw that down in just a moment and show y'all exactly what this looks like. But the simple fact that I could do all of that while the top was accessible, I mean, it's a huge difference. So kudos to Circle 3 for thinking about that, for thinking about it from the technician's point of view, because, you know, this is, I don't know, my third or fourth one to build, and this is the first time we've used their product, and I am super happy with that. Obviously, I don't have this top screwed on just yet. Screwed on in just a minute. But, I mean, come on. That is fantastic. So, let me put these final pieces on, and then let me talk about this because I'm pretty excited all in all. Okay, my desk is a disaster, but I tell you what, I'm so excited. This is it. This is our rig. We have put so much packed into this little package. And, you know, you've got a video switcher constellation, which is routable. You can route your inputs and outputs. Back in the back here, we've got a place to plug in our power, which is great. Just a little PowerCon whip that we've got over here. We can do some auxiliary power coming off here. HDMI inputs for our laptop, so we can just go straight out the laptop, HDMI in, that's gonna be fantastic. And then we have given access to a whole lot more of the SDI inputs and outputs. I didn't want to give a one and done thing, and then if they have a different need later, they have to change their whole rack. So we give them access to stuff. Additionally, I mentioned earlier in the video, we're gonna be adding a decimator to the rig. The decimator doesn't go inside, it floats on the outside. So if they're bringing in a computer or whatever, and they need to be able to convert it, they can take it from its HDMI into the decimator, from the decimator, plug it into one of these inputs. They're gonna have access to it. We also have multiple outputs that are assignable inside the constellation, so you can assign them to be whatever you want them to be. On the multi-viewer, we've given them HDMI multi-viewer, we've also given them SDI multi-viewer, and then we've given them their audio left and right for what they're calling the stereo playback rig, because they want to be able to take audio off to the venue, front of house, and be able to pump audio through the sound system. I'll say this about this specific build. The only thing as an operator, I would be a little bit disappointed that my constellation is right here at the bottom. I actually, as an operator, would prefer it at the top. And if you're asking yourself, well, then why didn't you put it at the top? The reason I didn't put it at the top is there was just so much going on inside the rig. I actually needed to put it in the space where it's going to take up the least amount of room. If I put it at the top where I want it as an operator, I wouldn't have had access to all that stuff I did as the lid was off. So a little bit of a trade-off there. I probably, if I was at a venue, I'm at front of house, I'm setting up, I'm probably just going to put something like that on it anyways. And now I can, you know, punch the buttons, have access to it, as long as I can get my multi-viewer to stay. But anyway, so what we're gonna do next, we're gonna set the whole thing up, but that's the build. And that was a fun build for me. In case you might be wondering, we scheduled 10 hours of build time to get this done. So, you know, maybe a weekend project for somebody who is ambitious and wants to put something together like this for your own creative endeavors. It took me a little bit less than 10 hours for a couple of reasons. One, I've done this a lot. I have all the tools I need. I can just pull it out and make it happen. Number two, I tell you what, man, this Circle 3 design, being able to access it from the top, that is a game changer, because normally I'm like trying to get my hands in there and it's just more frustrating than it's worth, and it takes a lot more time. So kudos to those guys. Coming up next, we get to see the whole thing in action. We're not going to show you how to set up laptops and all that stuff. You know how to do that. This is about AV installs. That's what we just did in a little portable rack. It's amazing. All right, so here we are. We have the rig set up for the first time. We've been testing the ins and outs and making sure that everything that we did inside works properly, and I just want to share it with you. This is pretty exciting. So we've got our primary computer over here. We got our backup computer. We have things labeled so that they're really easy for the operator to plug in. And then over here inside of our constellation, we currently have our primary source. If we hit the cut button, our secondary source is working. We've got that all sending off to a display monitor here inside of our studio where we can test things, make sure that they work. And if you remember, we're calling this the stereo playback rig. It's the stereo playback rig because it has stereo audio. So right now I'm looking at primary, but I mentioned that there's a thing called we got audio coming out, so we know that our audio works good, which is exciting. We've also tested audio on our backup. We can do the same thing. Oh, that's the primary. Here comes backup.
NL8, guess what? Has 8 conductors.
So we know that all that's working. The client's iPad, they're gonna set up the Orion app later on their own once they get their iTunes set up into that. But let me talk about a couple of other little features inside of this. Come on around the back here. We have a large power adapter, so that power whip that we talked about is put in here. That whip creates courtesy power for our laptops, for our iPad to plug into. We also have some power adapters for the operator if they're gonna charge their own personal cell phone, or maybe they're gonna use their laptop or whatever. They have some access to power through all of that. So the cool thing is you're an operator on your rider, you just put, hey, I need one 20 amp dedicated circuit in front of house, and then boom, plug in your whole thing and you can power your entire station. We also went ahead and labeled stuff with, color coordinated. This is like a little bit of a touring tip. Sometimes when you're touring and you go for load-in, you're not fresh. You're not thinking 100% clearly if you know what I'm going with. So by just making really simple color coordinated adapters, while the cords would work in any of the computer, it kind of cuts out some of the thinking. So we've done that for the operator. Everything's labeled on the back. So another unique thing that we're doing with this rig is we're actually going to be using the iPad as the multi-viewer. It's going to be an external monitor. We decided to go ahead and set this up on our own personal iPad, so that's why the iPad looks different than the show iPad, but we're using an app called Orion, and Orion just takes an ingestion of HDMI, and then you have to have a video capture device. We've got the multi-viewer HDMI going inside to the J5. The J5 is going off USB-C into the iPad, and then you can see the Constellation's multi-viewer. So the cool thing for the operator is if they want to be in multi-viewer mode, they just put it on the stand, hook it all up, and open up the app, and they're ready to go. Or if they want to be able to control their laptops and or their ATEM remotely, they can unplug the whole thing, walk throughout the venue, be able to control what they need to be able to control, and then go back. This has been a fun build. I hope that you have enjoyed the build. I hope that you've enjoyed the time with us. This is our first build project in the studio, but I think we're gonna do more. So if this is content that you enjoy, or you just wanna learn how to actually connect everything, and we've got videos that teach you everything that we did inside this rig. And if that's something you wanna know, make sure you hit like and subscribe, and we're gonna keep you up to date, and we'll see you on the next one.